My name is Ocean. I live in Chicago, a loud city full of secrets people hope no one ever sees. The day I was discharged from the hospital after a near-fatal accident, all I wanted was to lie down in my familiar home. But when I turned the key in the door, a strange vanilla candle scent and the sound of intimate laughter upstairs made my chest tighten. And then, on the bedroom floor, lay a familiar turquoise dress, silent, undeniable confession. From that moment on, I knew my marriage, and my life, had been rewritten by someone else's hand. Have you ever come home to something that made it impossible to return to the way things were? Share your story in the comments, hit like and subscribe to the channel because right after this I'll tell you the truth behind that door. The first time I met Mason was after my father's funeral when I was still drowning in grief. Amid the crowd of mourners, he was the only one who didn't try to offer hollow comfort. Mason simply stayed quietly by my side, handed me a cup of hot coffee and said gently, "If you don't feel like talking, it's okay to sit here in silence." That simple act made him feel more trustworthy than anyone else. We fell in love not long after, and 3 years later on our wedding day, Sloan, my best friend from college, stood beside me as my maid of honor. Back then I truly believed I had a devoted husband and a loyal friend. I had no idea those two names would become the deepest cracks in my life. My job wasn't glamorous. I worked in compliance auditing for a non-profit hospital system. Every day was about numbers, expense lines, and reports on charitable funds. One of them was the Harbor Care Fund, a fund used to wipe out medical debt for low-income patients. I had seen families cry with joy when they were told tens of thousands of dollars in hospital bills were forgiven. That's why I stayed, because I knew the numbers I checked could mean life or hope for someone. But that also meant I had access to highly sensitive financial data. And maybe that made some people uncomfortable. One evening during dinner, I mentioned a suspicious transaction from a supplier. My mother-in-law, Lorraine Whitaker, set down her knife, smiled faintly and said, "Ocean, sometimes being a smart woman means knowing when to stay quiet about men's money." I froze for a moment. It sounded like advice, but her voice had a chill to it. Mason, sitting across from me, quickly chuckled. "Mom always worries too much. Ocean's just following protocol. Don't take it so seriously." I smiled back, but something rippled inside me. Why would a story about a charity fund make Lorraine feel the need to warn me not to be curious? A few months earlier, Mason had started saying he had to meet clients in the evenings. As a freelance investment advisor, that wasn't unusual. But the frequency increased, and each time he came home, there was a strange perfume lingering on his shirt. He said it was from dining in crowded restaurants. I nodded, but it didn't sit right. Around the same time, Sloan became busy planning a string of events. She told me she'd been hired to organize a charity gala for the hospital, expected to raise hundreds of thousands for the Harbor Care Fund, the very fund I was responsible for auditing. I remember how my heart raced when I heard that. Was it a coincidence? Or was fate quietly setting up a chessboard I hadn't yet seen? One afternoon, I received a notification from the bank. Someone had requested to change the recovery email on our joint account. The new address? ocean.whitaker.co. I stared at the phone screen, heart pounding. I'd never used that address. I couldn't even create a new email without a legitimate reason. I called Mason immediately. "Did you change the recovery email for our bank account?" "What email?" "I didn't touch anything." "You're overthinking." His voice was calm enough to believe. But my gut didn't let me. I opened my laptop, logged in, and rejected the change. Then I checked the login history. There was a new IP address matching our home Wi-Fi. I knew someone in the house had done this. And if it wasn't me, it had to be Mason. Memories rushed back like a rewound film reel. Mason holding my hand at the hospital, eyes full of worry. Sloan texting me well wishes but never visiting. Lorraine's words like a tiny needle through the veil of trust. All of it formed a picture I didn't want to face, but the more I avoided it, the clearer it became. During a rare visit, I told my sister Cynthia while we sat in a cafe near the hospital. My cappuccino had gone cold. Cynthia rested her chin on her hand and said, "You don't think Mason and Sloan?" I shook my head. "I don't dare to think it. But everything feels off." "Ocean, I'm serious. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You work in auditing. If you don't believe in signs, who will?" Cynthia's bluntness had always been hard for me. But this time I had no argument. Mason grew better at hiding things. He still brought me flowers, still asked about work. But sometimes I caught him staring into the distance, eyes clouded, as if thinking of somewhere else. Or someone. The words, "I love you," didn't feel like warmth anymore. They felt like lines rehearsed too many times, drained of all meaning. And what chilled me most wasn't the perfume or the fake email. It was how all the little things began to connect. The charity gala Sloan was organizing, the fund I oversaw, Mason's growing absences, Lorraine's warning about staying out of money matters. It all spun into a circle with me at the center. Ocean, the one pushed aside. I started keeping a private notebook. In it, I logged every event. The nights Mason came home late, times I saw Sloan's name on event press releases, the exact moment the email request came in, even Lorraine's eerie comments. Each note was like a puzzle piece, slowly completing the dark picture I could no longer ignore. 3 weeks before everything unraveled, what seemed like a normal evening turned into a pivotal moment. I left a book club in Ravenswood, a new novel in my hands, planning to stop by my favorite Thai restaurant for takeout. The streets were quiet, streetlights glistening on the pavement after a light rain. I signaled to turn, my mind still on the fund report I'd reviewed that afternoon. Then an engine roared. Before I could react, a pickup truck tore through the intersection, headlights blinding. The screech of brakes. The violent crash. Everything went black. When I woke up, it was to sterile white ceilings and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. I lay still in a hospital bed, body aching, head heavy. A nurse leaned over and said gently, "Miss Ocean, you're awake. You were in a car accident, but thankfully your life isn't in danger." Moments later, Mason rushed in. His face was pale, eyes red. He grabbed my hand and whispered shakily, "Oh my God, Ocean. I thought I lost you." I forced a smile, wincing as I moved. "I'm still here. Just in pain." Over the next few days, Mason never left my side. He brought flowers, magazines, little updates from work, and whispered sweet nothings. One nurse even joked he was the ideal husband straight out of a romance novel. I wanted to believe that. And in my most vulnerable moment, I did. But something gnawed at me. Mason's phone was always on silent. I'd seen the screen light up with unread messages, but he'd quickly flip the phone over and smile reassuringly. "Just a pesky client. Don't worry, focus on getting better." I tried to push the discomfort away. But it stayed like sand caught under skin. The more I ignored it, the more it irritated. On discharge day, Mason picked me up in a freshly washed car. He opened the door for me, even adjusted my seatbelt. But as we pulled away from the hospital, I noticed a small gift box in the back seat, wrapped in shiny turquoise paper, the signature color Sloan used for her events. Mason swiftly moved it to the trunk and smiled. "It's a gift for a female client. Don't overthink it. Why hide it if it was so innocent?" Back home, as I set my hospital bag on the floor, the scent of unfamiliar vanilla candles hit me. Then a faint red lipstick mark on a wine glass left on the table. I froze, but forced myself to stay calm. In those seconds, I understood something clearly. If I reacted now, I might lose my only chance to find out the whole truth. That afternoon, while Mason was out getting food, I opened my personal laptop to check work emails. A system notification popped up. "Electronic signature of Ocean Whitaker has been used to approve disbursement from the Harbor Care Fund." My chest tightened. I remembered clearly, before the accident, I had rejected that disbursement because it raised red flags. A large sum directed to a newly formed event company with no verified credibility. So why now did the release order bear my name? I checked the access log. It was my account, but the login IP didn't match the hospital's computer. Someone had used my identity to legitimize the transaction. And there was only one person who knew enough, was close enough to impersonate me: Mason. I sank into my chair, a cold fear rising inside me. The accident happened right after I blocked that unusual transfer. Was it really just coincidence? I thought back to that afternoon. A man standing at the corner watching me as I left the parking garage. His stare had struck me as strange before he disappeared into the shadows. I had forgotten that detail until now. Mason returned, setting the food bags on the table. "You okay? You look pale." I forced a smile. "Probably just tired. I'll lie down for a bit." He leaned in and kissed my forehead. That same unfamiliar scent of cologne lingered. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to say a word. That night I didn't sleep. All the fragments began stitching themselves together in my mind. My mother-in-law's warning not to dig into money matters, the changed recovery email, Sloane's charity gala, and now the forged electronic signature. If I exploded, I'd only get polished denials. But if I stayed quiet, I could gather enough evidence to expose everything. I pulled out the notebook I used for work documentation and wrote in bold on the first page, "Marriage audit." I would track every word, every time Mason left the house, every transaction. I would document it all as meticulously as I had with thousands of line items in hospital audits. And I promised myself, if someone dared to use my name to cover their crimes, I would be the one to rip off that disguise and bring the truth into the light. Ever since launching my marriage audit, I had been living two parallel lives. By day, I wore my blazer, went to the hospital office, and completed my usual audit tasks. By night, when Mason believed I was asleep, I quietly opened my laptop, organized data, made notes, traced paths. Every small detail might one day become a crucial piece of evidence. On a Monday morning, while reviewing the list of patients supported by the Harbor Care Fund, I received an unexpected call. The voice was calm, deep, and warm. "Ocean, this is Aisha Monroe. I believe you remember me." I froze. Aisha was the older sister of a young patient whose entire medical debt I had helped forgive. I still remembered the boy's face as he held the confirmation letter. His eyes lit up like someone had handed him a future. "Yes, I remember. How's he doing now?" I asked, my heart softening. "Much better. Thanks to your help, my family got through a heavy burden. But I'm not calling to thank you. I'm now a financial crimes investigator with the Chicago Police Department. We've opened an investigation into the flow of money through several nonprofit funds. I have reason to believe Harbor Care is involved." My heart pounded. I replied slowly, "I've also seen irregularities. But, to be direct, I fear my husband is involved." There was a brief silence before Aisha answered firmly, "Then we'll track this all the way down, together." I hung up, feeling like I had found a true ally, a bridge between what I was quietly uncovering and what could become legal action. That evening, while Mason took a call out in the garage, I received an anonymous email. The sender had used a freshly created account, leaving only one line. "Check Sloane and Tyler Vance." Signed each. I read it 3 times. That name made me think of Ethan Hale, Sloane's ex from college. They had been wildly in love, then broke up on bad terms. Ethan had since become a journalist at a local paper known for exposing financial scandals. The email continued, "Sloane is seeing Tyler Vance, one of the hospital's top donors. But that's the surface. Be careful." I tightened my grip on the phone. The threads were connecting. Mason, Sloane, the fund money, and now Tyler Vance, the owner of a popular gym chain across Chicago, his perfect smile and muscular build plastered across billboards. I knew I couldn't wait. I needed a bait, a legal one. So I drafted a hypothetical report. It outlined a series of suspicious transactions within the Harbor Care Fund. Enough to raise internal alarms, but not enough to be obvious. I didn't upload it to the official system. Instead, I stored it in a restricted internal folder where only I had access. I wanted to see who would open it first. 3 days later, the result was clear. The system log showed someone accessed the file from an IP address in my home, specifically the Wi-Fi Mason always used. Before I could even process that, the document showed up in the personal inbox of Sloane. Piece by piece, the dominoes were falling. Mason accessed it at home and passed it to Sloane. But for what? For her to handle it? Or to advance a much larger scheme? I immediately backed up the access logs, took screenshots, and stored them on an external hard drive hidden in the closet. One afternoon, I met Aisha at a small cafe in Uptown. She wore a leather jacket and looked like any regular professional, except for the sharp alertness in her eyes. I handed her the printed log and whispered, "This proves Mason opened my confidential file," and then it ended up in Sloane's inbox. Aisha furrowed her brow, flipping through the pages. "Ocean, do you realize what this means? Your husband and your best friend are at minimum sharing internal information. If this connects to fund misappropriation, it's serious." I clutched my coffee cup. I'm not yet sure how deep it goes, but I want the truth. I can't stay silent while money meant to save lives is disappearing. Understood. But be careful. Don't let them suspect you're collecting evidence. We need them to show more of their hand. Her determined eyes gave me strength. For the first time since the accident, I didn't feel alone. That night, lying beside Mason, listening to his even breathing, I couldn't sleep. I remembered the moment I returned home after the hospital, seeing Sloane's turquoise dress draped on the floor. I remembered the female voice on the smartwatch recording. A soft, intimate laugh that wasn't mine. All of it was naming the truth. I carefully transferred the audio clip to my computer, saving multiple copies in case one ever disappeared. As Mason rolled over and draped his arm around me in his sleep, I caught a trace of that unfamiliar perfume again beneath the scent I once found comforting. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The plan was clear now. Step by step, piece by piece, every shred of proof would be laid out. And when the time was right, the full picture would leave no room for denial. I began sketching a map on a small whiteboard hidden in my home office. Red arrows connected accounts, companies, and familiar names. The medical debt relief money, meant to help low-income patients, had been siphoned out in small portions and funneled into Sloane's event company. Sloane Events stood out across fundraiser service contracts and donor referral commission papers. All of them had legal stamps, proper documents. But upon closer look, I saw repeating patterns. Same invoice templates, identical digital signatures, and dates arranged right to avoid suspicion. From Sloane Events, the money funneled again into another company, North Pier Consulting. I froze when I saw the registered owner, Lorraine Whitaker, my mother-in-law. I whispered to myself, my mother-in-law, my best friend, and my husband, all orchestrating a perfectly legal-looking operation. I typed into my audit log, the money moves in layers like an onion. The outer layer is charity, the middle is events, and at the core is North Pier. That afternoon, I met with Aisha Monroe at a noisy diner to mask our conversation. I spread the printed documents across the table and pointed to the chart. See this? Each contract lists planning fees, referral fees. Individually, the amounts don't look huge, but together they total in the hundreds of thousands. And the final beneficiary is Lorraine. Aisha furrowed her brow and exhaled sharply. Ocean, this isn't suspicion anymore. This is a money laundering scheme. They're using your position in the fund to keep it hidden. I nodded, my voice tight. I think my accident wasn't random. One night, while combing through rideshare data, I stumbled across something that made my heart lurch. The pickup truck that hit me had been rented through an app, using a credit card linked to North Pier Consulting. I immediately printed the billing statement, hands shaking. The renter used a fake name and a prepaid phone number. But the app had a call recording feature for customer support. And in that recording, a woman's voice came through, cold and composed. Just make sure she's out of work for a while. I replayed it over and over, heart pounding. That voice sent chills down my spine. It wasn't Sloane. It wasn't Mason. It had that drawn-out, formal tone, exactly the way Lorraine spoke. I slumped back in my chair, my breathing unsteady. The accident wasn't meant to kill me. It was calculated to take me out of the approval process during a major money transfer. While I was in the hospital, Mason handled the paperwork. Sloane ran the gala and North Pier took the payout. The next day, over family dinner, Lorraine looked at me with false concern in her voice. Are you feeling better, Ocean? That accident was terrifying. You really should rest, stop thinking about work. I bit my lip, holding back emotion. I looked her straight in the eye, steadying my tone. You're right, Mom. Maybe I should let Mason and everyone else take over for a while. Lorraine smiled approvingly and served food onto my plate. Mason stayed beside me, gently holding my hand like the devoted husband he pretended to be. I swallowed each bite, fury boiling inside me. That evening, I called my sister Cynthia. My voice was shaking but firm. I'm sure now. The Whitakers were behind the accident. Ocean, what are you saying? The car was rented using my mother-in-law's company card. And there's a recording. The voice, it's hers. On the other end, Cynthia was silent for a long moment before whispering. So they wanted you out of the fund? Yes. Not to kill me, to remove me from the approval desk. So the money could flow through. What are you going to do? I looked at the chart on the wall. Each red arrow was like a wound. I'm going to peel back every layer. until they have nowhere left to hide. In the days that followed, I worked relentlessly to gather more data. I backed up access logs, took screenshots of each transaction. I saved the smartwatch recording, the one with the strange woman's voice in our bedroom, onto 3 separate devices. I learned to hide USB drives in tea tins, to stash hard drives in the lining of old suitcases. Every time Mason held me and asked with concern in his eyes if I was okay, it felt like being touched by a stranger. I smiled, but inside all I felt was cold resolve. I knew I couldn't walk into this storm alone. If Lorraine and Sloan were building a dazzling stage to disguise the dirty money, then I'd use that very spotlight to force them into view. I called Ethan Hale, local journalist and Sloan's ex. His voice was raspy and fast, typical of someone who lived on deadlines. "Ocean, I owe you. Sloan embarrassed me once, so this time, I'm in. What do you need?" I lowered my voice, choosing each word carefully. "A story. But not an exposé, yet. I want a glowing profile of Lorraine Whitaker, the woman quietly supporting Chicago's charitable work. It needs to be flattering enough to make her feel safe enough to step into the spotlight at the upcoming gala." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then let out a dry laugh. "A trap wrapped in glory. I like it. I'll handle it." The Harbor Care Gala was heavily promoted by Sloan. Fresh flowers from California, Broadway-level lighting, and a VIP guest list full of donors, business leaders and city officials. I quietly accepted a ticket under my fund representative role. But I needed another pawn, Mason. One evening, while he was reading the paper in the living room, I moved closer and gently placed my hand over his. "Mason, I think we should go to the gala together. I want to try and restart our family. Show people we're still solid." He flinched slightly, then smiled so warmly I nearly forgot I was acting. "Ocean, I'm really glad you said that. We'll go together." There was something in his eyes, not sincere joy but relief. Like a man who believed his performance hadn't been discovered. I stared at that smile, keeping my face calm. Inside I whispered, "Let's see, Mason, where your loyalty lies when the stage lights come on." While Mason thought I'd softened, Detective Aisha Monroe was already preparing her next move. I had given her everything on North Pier Consulting. Staged contracts, financial trails, the accident recording. Aisha nodded solemnly. "This is enough for me to request a sealed warrant. We'll extract accounting data directly from North Pier's servers. If Lorraine's involved, she won't be able to deny it." I bit my lip and exhaled slowly. The thought of my mother-in-law, who always looked at me like I was beneath her, facing the law made me tremble and feel a strange satisfaction all at once. To push the test one step further, I devised a simple but effective trick. I emailed Sloan with the subject line, "Need dress advice for the gala." Our styles always matched. I attached a few fake gown photos. Each file was embedded with a pixel tracker, a tiny tool that told me exactly when and where the images were opened. I hit send and waited. That night, close to midnight, the alert came in. The files had been opened. But the IP address didn't belong to Sloan. Came from my own home. From Mason's laptop. I froze in front of the glowing screen. The man who once promised to protect me was now opening emails I sent to my best friend. Every mask was slipping. The next morning, over breakfast, Mason took across from me, flipping through a crisp newspaper. On page 3, a large headline read, "Lorraine Whitaker, the quiet woman behind Chicago's charitable foundations." Ethan's article as we had planned. Mason placed the paper in front of me, eyes shining. "See? Mom really is an incredible role model. The whole city recognizes it now. I think the gala's going to be a shining night for our family." I took a small sip of coffee, my voice soft. "Yes, I'm sure it'll be unforgettable." Inside, a cold irony curled in my chest. Shining indeed. But the spotlight would be bright enough to reveal what they'd spent years trying to hide. That evening I texted Aisha. "Make sure your team's ready. At the gala, I need every door open." She replied simply, "Ocean, trust me. When the curtain drops, we'll have the truth." I folded my phone and looked toward the kitchen where Mason was whispering on the phone, guarding his words like someone with something to hide. I turned to the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same one from 3 months ago. There was no innocence left in her eyes, only icy determination. The hotel ballroom in River North lit up under dazzling crystal chandeliers. The soft sound of violins floated through the air, mingled with clinking glasses and polite greetings. I walked into the crowd wearing a deep sapphire silk gown, my hair in an elegant bun, lips painted in a muted crimson. Mason walked beside me, his hand lightly resting on my back, but I could feel the tension in every one of his fingertips. On stage, Sloane smiled charmingly in a shimmering silver dress, holding a microphone, her voice steady and full of confidence. Let us welcome those who have helped build Harbor Care into the region's leading humanitarian organization. And a special thank you to this year's diamond sponsor, Mr. Tyler Vance. Applause broke out as Tyler stayed and gave a stiff bow, his face frozen in a tight smile. Lorraine, my former mother-in-law, sat proudly at the head table, her fingers heavy with diamond rings tapping against a champagne flute, as if she were the queen being honored. I moved closer to the stage when Ethan gave the signal. He was already in position, camera set to live stream directly to his private server. Aisha texted me one word: clear. Sloane invited me on stage as the Employee of the Year, a perfect role to place me right under the spotlight. I smiled, adjusted the microphone, and looked out across the ballroom. Lorraine, Sloane, Mason, all watching me, yet none of them truly seeing me. Before I speak, let's begin with a special video, our tribute to the patients and the community we've served over the years. The lights dimmed. The large screen lit up. The video began with warm, hopeful images. Nurses tending to the elderly, children hugging in rehab centers. My voice played gently in the background. We don't heal the body. We heal hope. But after about a minute, the images shifted. A financial flowchart began to appear, subtle, yet unmistakable to those in the industry. Harbor Care Fund, Sloane Media Solutions, North Pier Consulting. A number flashed, $728,000 in circular transfers. Below it, dates, transaction codes. I held the mic, my voice still calm. Some funds are designed to serve the community, but others seem to never arrive where they were intended to go. Mason shot to his feet. This is a mistake. That data hasn't been verified. Oh, then let's keep watching. I clicked to the next slide. A receipt for a rented pickup truck from a suburban transport company, followed by a short audio clip. Aisha's team had filtered the background noise. Just make sure she's out of work for a while. No danger, loss of credibility. The chilling voice cut through the already tense atmosphere like a blade. Lorraine went pale. She tried to leave the table, but two hotel security guards appeared, blocking the exit. A wave of murmurs spread across the room. People started pulling out their phones. Tyler Vance stood up. These documents haven't been officially released. I've never. He stopped as Aisha stepped onto the stage from the wings, dressed in a black civil investigation suit. She walked straight to the center and held up a sealed warrant. I'm Inspector Aisha Monroe. North Pier Consulting, Sloane Media Solutions, and all assets tied to the Harbor Care Fund are now under investigation for financial abuse and public contract manipulation. The room erupted in whispers. Ethan's cameraman had switched to a wide shot. Other cameras were now flashing. Aisha turned toward Tyler, her voice low but firm. And we confirm, Mr. Vance has cooperated. He provided internal documents showing that Ms. Sloane pressured him into signing fake referral fee contracts in exchange for media coverage guarantees. Sloane's face drained of color. She turned to Mason and grabbed his arm. We need to get out of here. Mason slipped from his chair and the two moved quickly toward the back exit. But then every light in the room came on. Ethan stepped into the center, camera aimed directly at them. The live stream is on. The entire city is watching. Sloane froze. Mason let go of her hand, eyes spinning in panic. I remained on the stage, silent. No more words were necessary. Mason was in a private staff room, his hands trembling on the table. His tie was gone, his dress shirt soaked with sweat. Across from him sat Aisha and another investigator, both silent. Only the tick of the wall clock echoed in the dry air. I stayed behind the one-way glass, watching Mason through the reflective pane. He tried to stay calm, but his vacant stare betrayed him. Finally, Aisha pushed a sheet of paper and a pen toward him. You either cooperate, turn over your phone, passwords, and all data linked to transfers from Harbor Care to North Pier and third parties. Or we bring you in tonight as a primary accomplice. Mason didn't answer immediately. He raised a hand to his face, exhaled sharply, then muttered almost in defeat. I didn't know it would go this far. It started as adjusting the media budget. Sloane said it would be fine. The question isn't what you knew. It's, what do you want to do now? Aisha pressed. Mason lingered in wordless stillness. Then in a moment that felt like surrender, he nodded. Hey, I'll turn it all over. The phone, email, tablet. I'll write down the passwords. But I just want to make it right. I don't want to lose everything. Lorraine was escorted out of the ballroom through the back door, hands cuffed, flanked by 2 officers. The white fur coat she once flaunted was disheveled, revealing a wrinkled dress beneath. But her expression didn't flinch. That same icy glare, like this was merely a temporary inconvenience. I waited in the hallway and didn't look away when she turned to face me. She stopped as she passed, her voice low but sharp as a blade. You were never one of this family. Never. I didn't respond. Because a few hours later I would learn why she had always looked at me that way. The investigation headquarters sat in a modest building near the old part of town. When I arrived, Aisha was already seated in the conference room, next to a thick case file. On top of it lay a worn brown envelope with frayed corners. The decryption team finished recovering files from Harbor Care's old system. There's a scanned document from the state of Maine. I think you should be the first to read it. I opened the envelope. A birth certificate. Name of child, Elizabeth May Carter. Date of birth, spring of 1991 in a small coastal town in Maine. Mother's name, Lorraine Carter. Marital status, single. I set the paper down, my throat tight. This is me. I whispered. Aisha nodded gently. She had you very young. Then left the baby at a neonatal care center. The record was sealed, but when she married Mr. Whitaker and changed her name, all traces nearly vanished. I closed my eyes. Fragments of memory began to align. Lorraine's strange look the first time she saw me at Harbor Care, the unwarranted contempt, the sudden decisions to remove me from auditing. I was the past she had tried to bury. Do you want to respond? Legally, it changes nothing. But if you'd like to open an additional investigation. I shook my head. No. I don't need blood ties to know who I am. And I don't need them as an excuse for someone to avoid consequences. I folded the certificate and slid it back into the envelope. Blood doesn't grant immunity. And I owe her nothing. Aisha nodded slowly. Then this is your choice, not fate. A cold wind brushed through my coat, but I didn't feel cold. All secrets were exposed. All performances were over. I was no longer the abandoned daughter. No longer family by their definition. On my first morning in Seattle, I brewed coffee in the small kitchen overlooking Puget Sound. The early light streamed through the glass window, casting a glow on the stack of files I'd brought from Chicago. Harbor Care case records, the saltwater ledger project draft, a handwritten letter from a patient whose debt had been forgiven because of my intervention. The new apartment was only about 700 square feet, but quiet and uncluttered, just as I needed. No more tiptoeing through a suffocating marriage. No more accusatory glances whenever I questioned a budget. The soft hum of a kitchen fan, the click of my keyboard, and the sound of distant waves. I came to Seattle at the invitation of the Washington State Attorney General's office. A new task force had been formed to investigate suspicious charitable organizations, especially those claiming to erase medical debt while actually laundering money or hiding assets. When I entered the conference room for the first time, the team lead, Evelyn Chin, placed a file on the table, looked at me and said, "We don't need a hero. We need someone who understands the system from the inside." I nodded. I'm not here to rewrite the rulebook. I'm here to strip the sugarcoating off what was supposed to be hope. I had no business card. My title simply read, Independent Advisor for Nonprofit Financial Transparency. But everyone knew why I had been invited. And everyone knew I had nothing left to lose, so I had no reason to stay silent. Saltwater Ledger began as a handwritten note, a rough chart of how charitable funds flowed into shell companies, then circled back to personal accounts. Ethan, a freelance journalist I'd once worked with, Called the moment he heard I'd moved. I know you're working on something. Don't say you're not, Ocean. I'm doing a feature series on medical debts that were supposedly erased. Yet hospitals are still mailing bills to the patients. People need to know the truth. I invited him over. After a few cups of coffee, he sat quietly, studying the financial maps I had pinned tightly across the wall. This isn't journalism anymore. This is a campaign. This is how you hold someone accountable. No, Ethan, I replied. This is how I show a community that they have the right to ask questions. Saltwater Ledger wasn't an independent investigative project. We built a public platform where patients could check the status of forgiven debts, look up the charities that claim to help them, and, most importantly, submit reports if something felt wrong. Ethan published the first piece after 3 weeks of research, a 3-part series titled, Erased on Paper, Forever in Their Lives? And the public response was louder than we had ever anticipated. As for Mason, he received a suspended sentence and 600 hours of community service after fully cooperating with the investigation. The court acknowledged he was the first to disclose the illegal transactions and voluntarily turned over all related assets. Some of the money was recovered. The rest he agreed to repay over 10 years. I didn't attend the hearing. After the sentencing, I wrote Mason a letter. Mason, the truth is your burden to carry. The rest of my life is mine. I carry no grudge and no hope. We chose our roles in an old play. I've chosen my exit. Ocean. I didn't sign my full name. I didn't want a drop of ink binding us any further. As for Sloane, she showed no remorse. But there was nowhere left for her to run. When the paternity test confirmed the father of her child was Tyler, her former assistant, no one doubted the scale of manipulation and deceit she had maintained for years. She was charged with falsifying electronic signatures, misappropriating charitable funds, and falsifying federal tax records. What surprised me was that she called Mason from jail, crying, "It's all your fault. If you hadn't brought Ocean in, I wouldn't have been investigated." But this time Mason didn't call her back. I closed my laptop and poured another cup of coffee. Outside, Seattle was damp and buzzing, but inside my small apartment things were finally taking shape. Nothing was perfect. Nothing was easy. But at least now, everything was real. A year later, on a crisp October morning, I was outside a red brick building in South Lake Union. It had once been an old refrigeration warehouse. Now it was Saltwater Clinic, a community health center built with crowd-funded money, committed to transparency with no hidden profits. In the main hall, instead of the traditional red ribbon, we hung a twisted rope made from old pieces of patients' clothing, donated voluntarily. The colors were mismatched, the threads worn thin, like their lives, frayed, incomplete, tired, yet held together by the very hope they once thought they'd lost. An 8-year-old boy had suggested the symbol when I asked patients what they wanted to leave behind in this place. In his crooked handwriting he wrote, "Make it like a lighthouse rope, so everyone can find their way back to shore." The moment I touched that rope during the grand opening, applause filled the room. But I didn't feel pride or fulfillment. What I felt was closer to peace. The kind of peace you feel when you've stood on the edge and helped build a bridge for someone else to cross. After the ceremony, when I returned home, a brown paper-wrapped parcel with no return address lay on my doorstep. I opened it. Inside was an old brass key, one of those vintage ones used for storage boxes, and a slip of paper written in blue ink. "I should have given you this key a long time ago. Use it where it belongs." No name. No apology. But I recognized the handwriting. It was Lorraine's. It had been over a year since I learned the whole truth, since the day she was prosecuted. The memory of a mother-in-law who was both culprit and victim of a system I had once tried to understand, once tried to forgive, came rushing back without logic. I slipped the key into my coat pocket. 3 days later I flew to Portland, then rented a car and drove to a small town on the edge of Maine where Lorraine had grown up. The post office sat off the main road, weathered, its sign faded, but the locker system still worked. I handed the key to an elderly clerk. He looked at it for a moment, then walked away without a word. Minutes later he returned with a metal box labeled 1280, sealed in cellophane. I opened it right there. Inside was a worn leather notebook, a few handwritten receipts, and a folder detailing specific repayments to patients, those who had been wrongly charged by the Harbor Care Fund, but had secretly been reimbursed from a private account. Some got a few $100s, others a few thousand. There were scribbled thank you cards attached. No one knew except her. No tracking system. No legal purpose. I lingered in the car for nearly an hour, quiet and motionless, the notebook on my lap, heart tangled in knots. Those payments couldn't undo what she had done. But they couldn't be erased either. Somewhere in that shadowed heart, Lorraine had tried to preserve one last sliver of humanity, quietly without credit. I sat there for a long time, hands gripping the journal like I was holding the final thread of a loop that once choked my life. That night, back in Seattle, I checked my phone. There was a missed call from Aisha, my old partner from Chicago. I called her back. Her voice was urgent. "Ocean, I know you're not involved anymore, but I need you to see this." A few minutes later, a file came through, an electronic receipt from a newly formed nonprofit network on the East Coast, with a financial structure nearly identical to the old North Pier model. What froze me wasn't the money trail, it was the name in the account creator's note. Sloane Carter. Under a new identity. I stepped onto the balcony and looked out over the Seattle night. The wind was cold, but not cutting like before. The city hummed as if nothing had happened. I turned back, picked up my phone and spoke calmly. "Send me a copy of the ledger. Let's begin." Not because I need revenge, but because a lighthouse rope can't shine if someone keeps trying to bury it in the mud. What would you do if the person who once broke you left behind the clue that starts your next journey? The key Lorraine left behind couldn't undo the losses I endured. But it showed me something else, that sometimes what we need most isn't perfect atonement, but a quiet closure strong enough to free us from anger. And you? If it were you, would you open that box? Would you forgive a part of the past, knowing it'll never fully heal? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your most honest answer, because maybe, my story was your story too in some way. And if this journey stirred something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss the next stories. Of families broken then rebuilt, of betrayals paid back in truth, and of people who seemed powerless, quietly rebuilding their lives right where they were once torn apart.